Thank you very much for having me here today. It's my honor to serve at St. Paul's this morning and anytime I'm able to be here with you. Today we're going to spend some time with Paul in Corinth. In our passage, giving a little context to what we heard today, Paul was frustrated with the church in Corinth because they were taken in by a group of visionaries who claimed to have miraculous powers from God. Perhaps they saw visions or claimed to work miracles. We don't and can't really know. But whatever the case, the church was so impressed by these claims that Paul, by comparison, seemed pretty ordinary, and they weren't really listening to him anymore. So Paul relayed a miraculous experience that his good friend had, likely talking about he himself, but he immediately undercuts that and reframes Christian power based on human weakness and reliance on God. This passage has become my thorn in the flesh for the last month, and I'm hoping today that God can give us all wisdom and guidance on how to apply it in our lives. When I read the passage for today, it reminded me of the many people, mostly men, who claim power and gather a crowd of fiercely loyal supporters around them. One such man was a U.S. president. This man had a significant power reshaping the U.S. and possessed a loyal following that refused to see his flaws. He had an almost divine kind of power over his followers. Many conservative Christians saw him as an agent of God sent to take America back for God. His opponents claimed he was a liar and guilty of several crimes to hold on to political power. He, of course, claimed his opponents were partisans on a smear campaign, and that he was not only innocent, but the only one who could save the good, God-fearing, patriotic American citizens from their enemies, both foreign and domestic. This man, of course, was Richard Nixon. Nixon was guilty, but all sorts of people believed then, probably some today, still believe he was innocent despite the mountain of evidence to the contrary. Smart people, wealthy people, professors, doctors, lawyers, loving mothers, doting fathers, lots and lots of people were taken in. Why? Because they thought he had power to accomplish their goals. Power to save them, power to bring order to chaos. He exhibited strength and claimed he could fix their problems, and people bought in. It's a very human behavior. All kinds of people are primed to be taken in when folks claim to have power to save them. They're primed to do so today, and they were primed to do so in Paul's day. Now, Paul's opponents didn't claim political power because they couldn't, but rather divine power through mystical experiences. Though Paul subtly lays claim to his own kind of mystical experience in his friend's story, he does not engage in a kind of mine is better than theirs style argument, because that would be to give in to his opponent's premise. That visible power, charisma, signs and wonders are all a sign of God's presence and approval. No. He claims that the God of the Bible doesn't work that way, that our God's power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. Nixon and Paul's opponents, many other people, say power is seen in strength. Paul says weakness. His claim seems odd until we start reading the Bible. Who did God call when they wanted to form a people, to start a nation who would know God and proclaim them into the world? God decided to begin a nation with an elderly man and his wife who were not able to have children even when they were young. God promised this nomadic, elderly man that he would not only be the father of many nations, but that his large family would settle and develop the land he only roamed on. It's because of the unlikelihood of God's promise and Abraham's obvious inability to accomplish it on his own that when it happened, God's power was revealed in the world. When God's people were enslaved in Egypt, who did God choose to rescue them and lead them to freedom? God chose Moses, an elderly fugitive with a speech impediment. It was this man's job to confront the ruler of the region, who ordered him to be killed and command him to release his free labor. Now, Moses had no army, he never took up a sword, and he required his brother to speak for him. But God used Moses to free the people and display their power in the world. Our chief example, of course, is Christ. When God decided to become incarnate in humanity, they did not choose to be born in Rome, the center of the power of the Western world, or even Jerusalem, the center of Jewish culture. God chose to be born in a poor family in rural Galilee, the backwater of backwaters. When Jesus went on to proclaim his kingdom, he chose to spend most of his time with the poor rural folks. And though he claimed power from God, he didn't use it to elevate himself or appear strong. He used it to cure the sick and feed the hungry. Though he knew he would die if he went to Jerusalem, he still went and delivered himself up to his enemies. Our God, who put off immense power to become human and mortal, then went farther and let the state arrest and kill him. We as Christians venerate the cross. We have a very large example here today, and it's on display in most Christian churches. It's through this greatest example of God's weakness that we see God's greatest example of power seen in the resurrection. Time and time again, we could go on. All throughout Scripture, God uses human weakness and frailty to display their strength, to heal the world, and to bring life out of death. Now, I don't know about you, I find this particularly hard to hold on to and to remember, and I think it must be because it's so counter our cultural message. I had some friends give me some advice on this sermon, and they had two bits of things that were important to share. First, this is no way a theological justification for living in abusive or unjust circumstances. We as Episcopalians have taken vows to resist evil and to strive for peace and justice in the world. We have no obligation to put up with injustice and abuse anywhere for any reason, especially not because that might give God a moment to shine in our weakness. This is their second point. We don't need to manufacture weakness because humans are already pretty frail. We're not in control of the world. We can't predict the future. We lose our temper. We don't live up to our promises. We fail each other and ourselves time and time again. Risk, change, uncertainty, and having to ask for forgiveness are the norms in our life, even if sometimes we pretend otherwise. And it's not like that's how God wants it. It's that God is the only one who remembers this. A core piece of growth in the Christian life is to keep our need to depend on God's strength in the forefront of our minds at all times. So, if you feel like you're struggling to hold it all together, if you feel like everyone else around you knows what's going on except for you, they don't. And you don't have to pretend to either. No one is in total control. No one knows what's going on. If you feel like actually everything is on track, if you're living above the rest of us mortals, remember that Moses had a 5-year plan. He planned to tend sheep and to live with his family for the rest of his days. What could interrupt that? God had other ideas. Listen for the call of God in your life to do something wild and risky, where you'll have to trust them to support you, something they're already doing every second of every day. Try new things, take risks, start a union. Be listening for the wild call of God that will pull you out of your comfort zone. It'll feel like it's all falling apart, but maybe it'll also feel like freedom. So we individually, we do the best that we can. We muddle through, ideally on our best days, relying on God consciously to give us strength. And God continues to call us into weakness, out of our comfort zone, to further their mission in the world and to learn to rely on them more and more, day in, day out. That's true of us individually. What about y'all together collectively as St. Paul's? Do we have any folks trained by GCC here? They were all at the 9 o'clock service. So GCC is a key player with St. Paul's. St. Paul's is a founding member with them at least, and they've done lots and lots of good in the world. That's Greater Cleveland Congregations. I'm used to the acronym, apologies. So Greater Cleveland Congregations, which organizes for justice in the world, defines power in two ways: organized people and organized money. Now, I'm not sure if you know this, but St. Paul's is the largest and the wealthiest church in the diocese, all the churches north of Columbus. I learned this from a retired clergy person, which surprised me. I said, wait, bigger than the cathedral? And they laughed at me. I said, yes, of course, it's St. Paul's by a mile. So here's what's been eating at me for a month. I want to try to pass this thorn from my side to yours. If God's power is made perfect in human weakness, if it shines through the clearest when we're consciously relying on them and their strength, how do you run a church that's as naturally powerful as yours is? I don't have the answer. But here are some directions that I might encourage you to think about and that I hope are true. Remember, these biblical figures I pulled out, they weren't total failures. Moses seemed to be a successful farmer. We're not told otherwise. From other texts, it sounds like Abraham was pretty well-to-do, also a successful farmer. There are lots of farmers in the Bible. They experienced God's power manifesting in their weakness when God pulled them out of their comfort zone and into a mission too big, too impossible for them to do on their own. Now, you're in a time of significant transition and have been for a while. You've had a total staff turnover, and you're just beginning to seek out who will lead you in the next phase of your life. Now, it makes sense, and I imagine my natural inclination would be to hope that after we get this next leader, everything will settle down and just go back to normal. When I think of the cross, of God's power made perfect in our weakness, my hope for St. Paul's is that there's no new normal. I hope that God calls you into work that seems impossible to accomplish, or perhaps only possible with God's help. I hope for anxious and controversial board meetings. I hope for sleepless nights wrestling with God to find the right direction for your church. I hope you all find unlikely allies to engage in shocking behavior with. I hope you challenge the status quo and make lots and lots of powerful enemies. I hope you do good, more good than you ever thought possible. Because it's not when everything is easy that we find God's strength. It's when we're sucked into something bigger than ourselves, something that makes us feel weak, something that requires us to lean on God for help every step of the way. For God's strength is sufficient in our weakness, and whenever we're weak, only then are we strong.